Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year and welcome to 2021. I'm Marty Rosendale, CEO of the Maryland Technology Council, and this is the live Capital M Zoomcast. The Capital M podcast was created to further the regional conversation around capital markets, define issues, identify solutions, and build consensus to drive change. Our focus for the past year has been on the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, the regional response, and the impact on businesses, entrepreneurs, and leaders. This year, Capital M will continue to look at the recovery from the pandemic, but we also want to get back to our discussion around capital markets and leadership. Our sponsors for the Zoomcast this morning are Alexandria Real Estate and Pfizer. The Maryland Technology Council is the industry trade association representing the technology and life science industries throughout Maryland. Together with our members, we're improving the business climate in Maryland and helping companies that save, secure, and improve lives around the globe. Before we get started this morning, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. Your microphones will be on mute. However, you'll find the chat and Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat and Q&A features to leave comments, to ask questions. I'll be monitoring those features throughout the discussion this morning and able to incorporate those comments as we go. This Zoomcast is also being recorded and will be made available for others to watch or listen to at a later date. So thank you again, everyone, for joining this morning. I really appreciate it. This is the first Zoomcast, the first production of the Capital M Zoomcast for 2021. And my guest today is Danessa Knaupp. Danessa is an entrepreneur. She's an executive coach, and author of the best-selling book, Naked at Work, A Leader's Guide to Fearless Authenticity. Danessa, welcome this morning.
Thank you so much, Marty. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Danessa, let's just jump right in.
Yeah.
You're a leader of leaders. You've dedicated your career to helping others. Just take a couple of minutes, if you will. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your journey to get to this point, and why leadership is such a passion for you.
Sure. So I have a long and spectacular history of failures. And what I learned fairly recently in my adult life, say in the last decade, is that I am far richer for it. And so I have spent now the last better part of a decade unlocking those failures in service to other people. I wasn't always a failure junkie. I wasn't always boldly sort of opening that with, hey, here's all the things I did that went wrong. But I spent a lot of my life trying to be first. So I grew up the child of US diplomats. I was in and out of the Northern Virginia, DC area, on the Virginia side mostly. I went to school. I did everything I was supposed to do exactly as I was supposed to do it and exactly when. I think there are probably some first children on, or people observing first children who can relate to that. And then I looked for something more. So I was leading in a Fortune 100 company and promoting quickly and really enjoying that leadership, but always feeling a little bit outside of it. And I left that and started my own business, loved it, and it was a boom and bust right around 2008, and really learned a lot from that. So the reason that leadership is critically important to me is because I know it is, while wildly unique, a really common path and common story for people. And what I've witnessed as an executive coach is that when people can unlock the commonness of that story, when they can think about, this happened to me and it's happened to lots of people, I can learn from it, I can share that, and we can all benefit from my experience. When they can bring forward that experience in service to other people, they really transform their teams and their organizations. And so that's why leadership becomes so important to me, is that when we have really good leaders, the ripple effects for companies and communities are really powerful.
Mm-hmm. So Danessa, that's great, but I'm curious, why did you write a book about it? Not everybody writes a book, right? So why did you write a book about it?
Yeah, I'll give you the real answer, Marty, and then I'll give you the PR answer. So the real answer is I'm pretty shy. and I don't like to network. And so I'm happy to do this because I'm coming to you from my office, and you'll probably talk to me and ask me questions by typing in or asking me, and then I can retreat to the safety of my introverted home. And so in about 2018, I was doing a lot of business development, and I thought, you know what? A book would let me share, talk about what I know, dive deeper. I'm a pretty curious person, so I had some answers that I didn't know yet about authenticity that I wanted to research, and a book seemed like the perfect way to be able to indulge my curiosity, sit in my house, and count it as business development. So that's the real answer. I think the other reason I wrote this book, and this is the PR and also the real answer, frankly, it's just the one people like better when they talk about the book, is this is the book I deeply needed. And I couldn't find it anywhere. So what I could find is a lot of books about sort of hashtag authenticity. So being naked at work is bringing forward your authentic self in service to others. But what's different about the book is it tells you exactly how to do it and how it could go wrong. And I couldn't find that book. I also couldn't find the business case for authenticity anywhere. So I'm kind of nerdy, right? We talk a lot about authenticity, but somewhere inside for years, I was like, is it really better? Like, does it drive different results? Does it make more money? And I couldn't find that answer. And so in thinking about the book, I thought, I wonder if I could go out and find the answer and then tell people exactly how to do it, which at that point I knew from my years of executive coaching experience. I could see the thread in how people make this journey. And so that book hadn't been written. There are 1,000 podcasts on authenticity. There's lots of books on, just be you, but there's nothing around, hey, be you and here's how. Let's begin. And so I wrote that book.
That's great. So I just want to let everybody know, Danessa, I met you through a colleague.
Yep.
And I got a copy of your book. And as soon as I finished reading it, I bought copies for my family. I bought copies for colleagues. I've been spreading copies everywhere because I think it's an amazing book. It's an amazing tale, but it's also, it's very authentic, first of all. Secondly, I think it's just right on target. So tell us a little bit about, what does fearless authenticity mean to you?
So I think let's start with fearless, because some people think fearless means not sensing or noticing fear, right? We have this idea. And so frankly, a lot of us are feeling a lot of fear lately about how to navigate in a time we've never navigated in, about our future as business leaders, about the environment we're going to be leading in. And so I worry when we talk about fearless without diving deep, like you and I are here today, Marty, people opt out and think, well, I secretly am kind of freaked out, and so that's not me. Fearless to me means seeing and noticing the fear and choosing to move forward anyway. Right? So it's a little bit like taking fear by the hand and bringing it along. It doesn't mean that you're not seeing it, not feeling it, not experiencing it, but simply you're looking at it, understanding it, and choosing to move forward. So that's the fearless part of it. Because frankly, being authentic has risks. And it would be naive to think like, I'm just going to be me, take it or leave it. In fact, that's one of the key mistakes people make around authenticity. And so that's the first part, is noticing that it has risks, understanding that it's nuanced. And then the authentic part is bringing forward your full self in service to other people. We all know somebody in our lives who brings forward their full self in service to themselves, right? Like everybody just has to accommodate me, who I am. That's not what I mean here. What I mean is thinking about what experiences have you had in your past that could serve the people you're working with now? And how do you welcome those in, even if they're not shiny, even if you might not put them on your CV, but bringing them forward to build community and to build experience and to create safety for people working around you.
So there's also an aspect here about being self-aware. about understanding who you are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses or gaps might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think self-awareness is the critical underlying component of authenticity. And often it's the one that when I begin to work with clients, or when people in my firm, other coaches begin to work with clients, it's what we start with. So we might do an assessment, we might do a 360, but how do you really see yourself? And one of the concerns I have is all of us on this call lead big and important organizations. And so we are used to making fast decisions and judging really quickly, right? All of you should be able to judge really quickly, and you're good at it. That's why you are where you are. But to be self-aware, you need to divorce awareness and judgment, because the judgment is what shuts you down. So if you think I'm not very good at this, the judgment creeps in really quickly on, so maybe I shouldn't do it, or I probably shouldn't talk about it, or and you start to pull back from that engagement. What I would love for leaders to think is, gosh, I'm not very good at this. How can I learn?
Mm-hmm.
Who is? What can I, if I'm not the one, what's next? So I'm working now with a C-suite member of a large private equity firm in Manhattan. And we've worked together a long time. So he's through this. And he had a moment yesterday in our conversation where he said, I know I need to do this. And he's a Scot. And he was like, man, I'm just rubbish at it. I can't do it at all. But I know I need to. And this person on my team does it really well. So can you and I talk about a way that we can invite them to do it while I learn from them? That's beautiful self-awareness, right? This has to happen. I'm terrible at it. And there's no, you notice there's no descent into a spiral on, I'm terrible at it, we better not do it, somebody else should do it, how am I not good at this? Just sort of this acceptance of, I'm rubbish at it. I'm working on it, but in the meantime, let's do something else. When I was in Georgetown's coaching program, the very first day, they had us write on 2 facing pages of a notebook, I am an outstanding coach and I am a beginner. And they said, as you think about your career as a coach, you will sort of sit on this, you know, those Bosu balance balls, this hold the tension between these 2 things. Today, still, I am a terrific coach and I am a work in progress and a beginner. So holding that tension of I am both a masterpiece and a work in progress, and being open to that and aware is the key to some of this. And so it all begins with that self-awareness, Marty. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's interesting that the first time that I really understood that lesson, I was an executive at the American Red Cross when Elizabeth Dole was the president of the organization.
Yeah.
And she was amazing watching her. She knew what she was good at. She knew what she wasn't good at, and she surrounded herself by people that filled those gaps. And I thought that was an amazing leadership trait.
Yeah. And you experienced what that does, right? It creates a really powerful, strong team. You're not denigrating her for not being good at that.
Right. Exactly.
You're saying, look at that. We went and did it. It's a little bit like when we're hesitant to apologize. But then if we think back in our own experience of apologies, if someone has done them well to us, they have only increased our esteem of that person. It's that vulnerability actually creates safety and positive regard.
Yeah. Yeah. So Danessa, in the book, you cited Tim Gallwey's equation for performance. Yeah. Performance is equal to potential minus interference.
Yeah.
For the past year, I think the leaders, people on this call, leaders all across the world, have experienced more interference than they ever thought possible. Yeah. How does authentic leadership apply in that situation? And so maybe ask a different way. What does authenticity in a crisis look like?
Yeah, that is such an important point, Marty. So for those of you who don't know Tim Gallwey's work or may not have read my book, Tim Gallwey is a behaviorist who really says anything we do is just a matter of our potential to perform that task, less anything in the way. And he calls what's in the way interference. And the interference at both a macro and a micro level has been deafening in 2021. And what I mean by macro level is, of course, the world swirling around you. What I mean by micro level is all the things that have changed for you personally, right? So you're no longer meeting people for drinks. You're all those things that have changed, all those ways you used to fuel yourself. And so what I think being authentic looks like there is the acknowledgement of that. We've talked a lot about leadership in crisis. And in fact, a lot of our discussion and programming shifted last year in March to help people understand, if you do nothing else, what are the 3 critical competencies in crisis for leaders? Because what we were hearing is people were saying like, dude, I have never done this before. We don't have a single person who led through the 1919 pandemic, right? Those people are not leading in business.
Right.
So every single one of us is brand new. If you were in China, you might have had a month or 2 head start, but otherwise, like, this is it, we're in it together. And so for me, those competencies are around, how do you tap into your compassion? How do you tap into your candor? And how do you tap into your courage? And if you really focus on those 3 competencies, you will be able to steady your ship through a storm. So compassion is about being human, understanding that the world has turned upside down, understanding that for those of your employees who are women, the jobs report published in December said 110% of jobs lost in the US belonged to women. Unbelievable. That's tapping into your compassion. Tapping into your compassion is noticing that in April of last year, your employees in New York City were watching people being loaded into mobile morgues in front of their houses, right? Noticing, what does that look and feel like? What must the weight of that be like? And acknowledging we are not our best. We are surviving here together. That's what compassion looks like. Candor is being clear. So just like when you remember being taught what to do in an emergency, Marty, when there's an emergency happening, the noise of it drowns out everything else. And so to get people to listen to you, you have to be crisp. It's why if somebody collapses in a restaurant and you're first on the scene, you say, Marty, call 911, right? I call you by name, so you hear me. That's really important for leaders to remember. People are handling all kinds of noise. And so your instruction has to be really crisp. You have to say what you know and what you don't know. You have to be transparent. We don't know anything about what's going to happen in the next 3 months, but what I do know is I'm going to be talking to you weekly on Wednesdays, or we're going to meet every morning, right? What can you give people that they can depend on? That's candor, really crisp clarity. And then courage to step into places that might have been uncomfortable before, to move when you might have had less data than you did before, to be able to pivot off of something. Sometimes courage can simply look like, normally I work a 60-hour week and I just don't have it. And so I'm dialing back to 40, right? But candor, compassion, and courage are the 3 competencies that I'm working with my leaders on, I'm speaking about, and they're woven through the book as well. They're not new to you as a reader, Marty, but that help leaders really navigate when it feels like the sky is too dark to see stars.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking about that, it took me back to a couple of decades ago. My wife we both got involved with the American Red Cross disaster services. And my wife is a registered nurse, and she has this amazing capacity in an emergency. She goes into what I call emergency mode, and it's just she's focused. She's telling people what they need to do, and it's that candor and that directness, and it makes people comfortable. It makes them feel like they're participating, and it gets everybody through the emergency. And I think that's really phenomenal. I just want to remind everybody that you can use the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We are monitoring it, so if you have questions or comments, we can incorporate them into the discussion this morning. So, Danessa, recently the Kauffman Foundation did a survey of businesses and entrepreneurs, and they were looking at the impact of the pandemic recession on businesses. And they found the first three highest priority all had to do with customers. It was difficulty getting customers, difficulty maintaining customers, and it was because of the inability to meet with customers face to face. But the fourth highest challenge that they found from these leaders was fear and self-doubt. Now, when we think of leadership traits, we think confidence and strength. We don't think fear and self-doubt. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I think that it's shocking to me it was only fourth. I think those are the people brave enough to say it.
Right.
So let's talk for a second first, Marty, about the myth of confidence, because that is a really powerful one. So one of my favorite books is The Invisible Gorilla. And it talks about a series of psychological experiments around what people believe, what you and I would bet on, Marty, we'd put money on, and then they very easily and simply unpack it and disprove it. And one is the myth of confidence. So we have this idea that leaders are supposed to be confident. What we actually know, though, is that the more confident a leader is, the less effective they likely are, because they are not open, perhaps, to other ideas. So, and the study was done on doctors. So doctors who used a reference manual versus doctors who diagnosed without. So that's the first piece, is that we have a belief about confidence that leads us to not always admit when we're not, that actually is based in fallacy. What I would say we can be confident about, and what I would ask people to think about, is you have not navigated a pandemic before, but you have navigated really difficult challenges. And especially in a place where we sometimes think really pragmatically, we think, well, this is different than anything before. It is, but the components of uncertainty, the components of stress, the components of needing to pivot off an idea to something else, you've navigated all of those before. And so what I work with my clients on is, how do you draw strength from prior experience that you can apply here? Where have you solved a problem like this before? And what did that look like? How did you come about that? Who did you include? And how might we use a similar process to address this? We had a question in the chat that I just saw that said, how do we think about this in real life, in the boardroom? I'll give you an example that I'm allowed to share. Coaching is entirely confidential, so typically I change. This person I'm about to share with you that I coached is a person in the public forum, and so she has allowed me to do this. So the person I'm talking about worked for in the pharma industry, and she was an attorney responsible for the opioid litigation defense. So you'll remember a couple of years ago, there was that opioid litigation against 3 big pharma. She was responsible for the defense. And for those of you who, like me, may have concerns about opioids in this country, what I didn't understand is, without the defense as it was enacted, we would not have had the infrastructure to distribute the drugs we need to fight this pandemic if the defense hadn't been successful. And it was a nuanced case, but the example I'll share with you is, she had to come back and have a really candid conversation with her board around, here's how we want to think about engaging with the other defendants, right? So there was this fear of, hey, we're each being sued. We have very different practices. We should think about, us first. And she came back with the vulnerability of, how do we think industry first? How do we combine our collective example? How do we bring forward learnings to talk about this differently? That's an example of using that vulnerability in the boardroom. What she said is, we can try to defend this on our own independently, but it's not the best thing for our company. And so we should open up and have this conversation. Other examples of vulnerability in the boardroom are typically around, how do we open roles? How do we pursue new opportunities? And how do we think about elevating other voices? So to be clear, when I talk about vulnerability, I am not talking about having a weep fest about your mean father at the boardroom, right? That's not what we're talking about. That's an authenticity misfire. Executive presence has very clear components, and as leaders, we need to be aware of them. But what I am talking about is sharing, where are you strong? What can you lead effectively with? And where will the company benefit from bringing in additional support? Sometimes if we pivot and start thinking that way, I'm a steward of this company. And so I'm comfortable and confident leading in this space. And I see a gap for us here. How do we address it? It's a way to bring forward that sense of vulnerability and openness and awareness in a way that doesn't feel weak.
So something you said just a second ago, you talked about letting others have a voice.
Yeah.
And one of the other major topics in 2020 is diversity and inclusivity. I had a colleague tell me not long ago, she said, if your leadership team, if your inner circle is not diverse, then your perspective is limited.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, so we understand diversity is a critical factor for success. How does all this fit with that conversation around diversity and inclusivity?
So I'm a huge Dolly Parton fan. I hope there are others out there. Dolly Parton, especially after her funding a large part of the Moderna vaccine research. But Dolly Parton's quote in the middle of the protests over George Floyd's murder in June was my absolute favorite. And she said something to the effect of, who are we to think our little lives are the only ones that matter? Of course, Black lives matter. And that is what happens when we start sitting in an echo chamber, is we make us and other, right? Many of us right now in our personal lives are experiencing us and other. And what we do then is we shut off a route to wisdom. This is not, to be clear, I'm not talking about, let's all hold hands and sing around the campfire together all the time. What I'm saying is that as a leader, you want to be standing on top of a virtual mountaintop with a clear 360-degree view of what's around you. If the voices informing your view all look the same, you are looking at one wedge. It's
right.
Not good for business. So when we think about equity and inclusion, we want to think about, how do we give everybody the opportunity? How do we seek out voices that historically have been quiet in our organizations? How do we learn about why that's happened? And then how do we bring all of those people together, and we as leaders be open to that? That's how we open all routes to wisdom.
That's great. I love the analogy, looking at just a wedge of that 360-degree view, because I think that's so true. Without that equity, without that inclusivity, and diversity and equity is really nothing without inclusivity. You really miss that. You miss that perspective. You don't see the whole world, which is a problem for a leader.
About 3 years ago, I realized that my social circles were not nearly as diverse as I wanted them to be. And as much as I would like to run out and tap Black and brown people on the shoulders and ask them to be friends with me, I realized that even that was ridiculous in how I was thinking about it. I should look at the underlying root of that. So what I did in the meantime was I began to read, and I switched all my social media feeds so that on social media, I am typically following at a rate of about 80-20 Black and brown leaders now. To listen to their dialogue about what's happening. And as part of that journey, it was 2016, I encountered a woman named Layla Saad. Layla Saad created and now has a book around the single most powerful experience I've ever had on race. And to give you a clear example of the scope of that statement, I lived in apartheid South Africa when I was a child. So Layla, if you are a white leader, Layla's book is called Me and White Supremacy. And it is a journaling exercise around how white supremacy has benefited you as a leader. I did it very reluctantly. I thought, this is my gig. I know how it's affected me. I'm good. But I'll read it because, I should probably be open to that. It was incredibly powerful for me. And what reading leaders, especially leaders when I think I disagree, when they make me uncomfortable in my stomach, what I've learned through this experience and what I continue to learn is I'm okay being uncomfortable. The more uncomfortable I feel, the more it's an indicator of that's something that's different than my paradigm. And so I should dig in there. We sometimes think uncomfortable is unsafe. It's not at all. I'm sitting in my house reading, I'm perfectly safe. But I'm striving to be uncomfortable as I think about that, because what I'm experiencing is other people's reality. And if I am walking forward telling people I can help them, I need to be sure that I'm telling more than one kind of person I can help them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my responsibility is how I think about it in that root to wisdom thing.
So Danessa, I'd like to come back to something that we were talking about a minute ago, which is self-awareness.
Yeah.
There was a quote in your book that I found particularly powerful. I'm going to read it to everybody. And that quote is, at its core, authenticity is about knowing yourself, owning yourself, and acting in a way that aligns with your values and principles. Again, I think that's a powerful statement. Explain to us, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and that is, it is. Those are my words, and I appreciate you quoting them. They are based in data, though, of how people define authentic leaders. So knowing yourself is about authenticity. Owning yourself is about being open and accepting of all the parts of you without that judgment. Now, it does not mean you get a free pass to be an asshole on some kinds of things, right? It means that you're aware you have triggers and you're working on that, right? So that's the owning yourself. This is my responsibility. This is how I think about it. And then acting in a way that aligns with your principles. One of the things that I've been interested in, ties to what we talked about just before we started, Marty. That is the place that often this breaks down for leaders, is they hope someone else will speak up. Mm-hmm. They think that their silence is easy. It's nice for people to be silent. It's not, you don't make people uncomfortable. And it's true, silence typically doesn't, because when we are silent, people assume we're with them. And so it makes everybody happy, right? It's why everybody loves their dog more than their teenager on some days, right? Your dog doesn't talk. Your teenager has uncomfortable opinions and, sounds off. It's why the 8-month-old is always cuter than the 3-year-old, right? But we assume silence is alignment. And so that last part around acting and speaking in a way that aligns with your principles is what takes a lot of courage. We're seeing examples of that now after the Capitol insurrection and attack. Mm-hmm. Is we're noticing where people speak and where they don't. We saw that again in June. There were companies that delayed so long after George Floyd's murder that by the time they said something, they had already spoken volumes. Mm-hmm. And you want to think about, what do I believe in and how do I say it? You don't need to say it in a way that offends people. You don't need to say it in a way that is brash or noisy. But when you lead, by definition, people are interested in where you are going to go. Mm-hmm. And we need to talk about, here's what I believe in, here's where I'm going. And so that's the authenticity, is knowing yourself and that self-awareness, owning yourself. This is where I am. I'm learning. Here's what I know I'm good at. Here's what I know I'm no good at. For me, I curse. I try not to. My mother would like me to try harder. I know that has impact on presence. And I also know that sometimes the word I want to use is the only word that effectively conveys what I want to say. Right? So I own that. I own that some people will be turned off by that. Some people will be turned off by what I post on LinkedIn. That's okay. I'm working in alignment with my principles. I stand for something.
So before we get to the question and answer session today, is there, and I'll just remind everybody again, please use the chat feature and the Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. Is there anything, Danessa, that we have not touched on this morning that you would like to touch on?
Yeah, and it is that this is super hard. So for those of you who are like, oh, she wrote a book, it must be good. Like, I'll check that out this week and knock it out next. By all means, buy the book, read the book, and I hope it works out that it's by next week, things are different for you. But what we're talking about are simple concepts that are hard to execute. And that's really important that we acknowledge that. Sometimes we don't talk about things that are hard. We live in such a hack culture that we forget that some things are just supposed to be hard. It's okay. The activist Glennon Doyle reminds us we can do hard things. But what we're talking about is hard to do. And so what I'd encourage you to do is, if this journey interests you, if you're thinking about it, that sounded very like we were gonna put an 800 number that you could call on the bottom of the screen. That's not what I'm going for. That you acknowledge that it's hard and that you seek out some help. So this council has lots of folks involved that could perhaps help you in a peer capacity, right? Help you think about this journey. There are entire firms that exist like mine that can help you with partnering with a coach. You can seek out help on it. There are ways to do this that will provide you the support you need. So please don't misunderstand the simplicity of this problem for an indication of how easy it is. We don't really actually live authentically all that often. And so to do that is to unpack habit, is to get uncomfortable, and you can ask for help for that. It's easier. And we often ask for help for new things, but it's been a long time since we collectively as professionals did something we were entirely beginners at.
Mm-hmm. But you gave me an opportunity to put a plug in for something that the Tech Council has been doing. The Tech Council has a venture mentoring service, and we have about 160 trained, experienced executive mentors in that service. But recently with the pandemic, we formed the Business Continuity Task Force. And these are senior executives that have been trained and are experienced mentors that have led companies through other past economic downturns. And their role and what they're doing, volunteering their time to do it, is helping companies navigate these challenges. And some of it is dealing with that self-doubt. Some of it is dealing specifically with some of the issues that have come up. But I'm curious, so hopefully we're in the final stages of this pandemic. We're working our way through it now. Is there any specific advice you would give a company or a CEO that is now looking at the next 6 months and thinking, okay, I've got 6 months of this to navigate. The world's never going to be exactly like it was. So, how should I be looking at that? What should I be focused on right now?
Yeah, so I wish we had cameras on so I could see the enormous collective eye roll I'm about to get from my first piece of advice. But I really mean it. And that is to be kind to yourself. This is a really long time you've been doing this. It's really hard. Every time you get up, it's different. It's harder every day. So what being kind to yourself looks like, might be bubble baths and cookies or something, but that's not the frou-frou I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is to just acknowledge that you are running on less than a full tank. Your surge capacity, which we had to deal with emergencies, was depleted long ago. And so when you are overwhelmed, when you're not sure what to do, just give yourself a minute. Give yourself some time and grace. What you're doing is really hard, and you've been doing it a really long time. So that's the first thing. And I realize that leaders take a minute to have that sink in. The second thing I would tell you is strive to be hyper present. We have absolutely no idea what will happen this Wednesday, what will happen next Wednesday. It's a waste of your energy to think about it. You can roughly scope it out, think about where you want to be, but spending time worrying about what happened or projecting into the future just detracts from the energy you have available to handle it now. And so where you can be hyper present on what's important right now. What do I need to do to know myself, own myself, and act in a way that aligns with those principles? What's the next right step? And then when you're there, the world looks different. You'll see something else from there. This is a really hard behavior because you've been rewarded your entire career for being able to see things, project, move forward, move fast. I was too. It's really hard for me. This is my personal struggle to just sit in the place and think, okay, from here, what do I see? And when you go there, from there, what do you see? But being hyper present allows you the most amount of flexibility.
That's great. So let's open it up to questions. And so again, please use the chat function, use the Q&A. It looks like we also allowed the raise your hand feature if you would prefer to ask your question in person. And while we're waiting to see if we have any questions from the audience, Danessa, so you're in addition to the book, you're an executive coach.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about the importance of utilizing an executive coach. I've utilized executive coaches before. I've coached and mentored others. And talk to us a little bit about the importance and the value of taking advantage of getting an executive coach.
Yeah. So first of all, I am wildly biased in this space. I think coaching is so important that I laid down my golden handcuffs and walked away from my Fortune 100 corporate gig, much to my father's chagrin, to do this. What I think is really important about it is this. I would challenge you as a leader now to think of how many people you know that you can talk to and be fully transparent about a challenge you're facing. And be able to put it all on the table and then look at it with that person. What I found is that most of my leader clients have almost no one they can do that with. You can't lay it out in front of the board with full transparency until you've thought about it or managed it. You can't lay it out in front of your executive team because of nuances there. Many of you can't lay it out in front of your spouse because of the anxiety it may create. You may have someone, and you may be able to talk about this with lots of people, but talk about something that's troubling you or challenging you fully. Talking about it with vulnerability on what you really are worried about, what you don't know. There's not a lot of safe spaces for leaders. I'm talking about really safe. I'm talking about a conversation in July I had with a COO of a business who said, you know what, I'm looking back at our hiring and I don't think we've been fair to Black candidates. Like really safe. That's what coaching can do, is to help you explore that space, to give you time, to give you tools. You know, I'm introducing models and concepts and ways to think about it to my leaders so that they've got help, and it's help that's targeted. It's not a class. I'm not, you know, I don't always on page 4 bring, you know, on session 4 bring this up. And so that's why it's so critically important, is a trained coach. And that is really important, right? You want a trained executive coach. A trained executive coach can pull out what the components of the problem are, can help you sort through that and solve that, and can give you a safe space to find your answer. It's different than a consultant, right? A consultant brings their answer. A coach helps you find what the right answer is for you. I think it's critically important and a key defining characteristic for folks in success.
So Danessa, we have a question, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. The question is, how can we encourage our managers to utilize these, the things that we've talked about this morning, the things in your book, these leadership traits and characteristics, not only themselves, but to encourage their direct reports to use them as well?
Yeah. I think having the conversation about it, talking about it. One of my favorite questions I get from leaders is like, isn't everybody going to know that I'm acting different? What should I say about that? How about you say you're working with a coach and acting different, right? Like, that's good. I'm trying this new thing. What we need to understand is that ripple effect is really beneficial. So when you're talking about your own experience authentically, you can invite that in from other people. We see this a lot when people think about performance review cycles or how to give feedback. When we have a culture that says, I can give you feedback, and in doing that, I can communicate that I am fully supporting you, that I am in your corner, that I want what's best for you, and that ripples to people, it creates powerful trust in organizations. So absolutely, I'd encourage you to have open conversations with your teams, to ask openly for feedback, to give feedback openly, all in the supported idea of, I am here to solve problems with you and support you more effectively as your leader, right? It's in service to other people. This is not a, radical candor, rip the Band-Aid off, I'm going to tell people what I think and drop the bomb and leave. This is about, how can I be candid in a way that supports people moving forward?
Right. So we have another question, and that is, where should someone look for these types of safe relationships, where you can be transparent, and thoughts about establishing that relationship?
Yeah. So I think when you look for a coach, you can look at coaching and development firms. So our firm is Avenue 8 Advisors. We work all over the US and globally. And you always want to talk to more than one potential support. So you want to talk to 2 or 3 coaches that can help you understand what that fit looks like. If you're looking for that candid, supportive relationship outside of formal coaching, I think it's just around setting the boundaries with a peer, right? I'd like to have coffee with you quarterly, and I'd like to talk about what each of us are working on developmentally. Or working with a peer at work and saying, hey, I'd like to get better at this in meetings. I want to be really present and I want to encourage dialogue. So can you help observe me? Can you give me feedback when you see? I think being really open. And then when people do it, being appreciative. One of the crystallizing moments for me in my career, just a reminder, I'm a professional coach. I give feedback all the time. Should be good with it. Was I had a peer give me feedback that was so mortifying to me, it shut me down for 3 days. When he gave me the feedback, I wanted to do nothing but crawl off the phone. But it was an enormous gift that he gave me. And so I had to pull myself together and respond and think about it. And then my first call back to him had to be a powerful and authentic thank you. Right? These relationships where people help us by nature bring forward things that we're not seeing, right? If we saw it, we would correct it. And we're used to seeing all the things. So really making sure that no matter whether you seek that relationship formally with a coach in a coaching organization or with a peer, that you're ready to be open to that. You're ready to change your behavior. You're ready to see things differently is really important.
Yeah, I think it's also difficult for the coaches to give that feedback sometimes.
Yeah,
I know we see that with the mentors in our mentoring program. We see that in the business continuity task force. It can be difficult to give that feedback sometimes. But I agree, when you do, and once it sinks in, and once you get beyond the first impact, it can be very powerful.
Well, and really a gift of kindness and honestly love for the other person, right? That he was giving me feedback on how I presented something, my peer coach, and man, what a total and absolute gift he gave me. It was a way I didn't see it. I've been able to correct it. I can connect more effectively with people. It was such a gift he gave me. But we all like to be told we're great. We don't like to get the call that, hey, that went wrong.
Right.
That was a big flub.
Absolutely. I remember there was a time where I was running an organization, and we had merged with another company, and the merger was going to result in a number of layoffs, a number of opportunities for efficiency, if you will, to put it in management speak. And that was a tough time because we needed to keep the company running. We had to deliver a lot of bad messages to people, and it was a tough time. And I can tell you, that's when the first time that I engaged with an executive coach, and it was tremendous. I mean, he was exceptional at asking me the tough questions, making sure that I thought through all the repercussions, and in helping me manage that, and realize that often, the message that I was delivering, while it may sting a little bit, it was really a good message going forward.
I think, Marty, one of the things that is the piece I love best, the data snippet I love best about coaching, is people often estimate the ROI on their investment in a coach at between 7 and 10x. Can you imagine any other investment you make for the business between 7 and 10x return on how you make decisions, how you think about it, the clarity? It's really powerful.
Yeah, that's great. So we're coming up to the end of our time, and I don't see any other questions here in the chat or the Q&A. So Danessa, I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been great. I want to remind everybody, if you haven't read Naked at Work, I highly recommend that you do. It's a great book. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And again, you've been, this is Marty Rosendale. You've been watching the Capital M Zoomcast with Danessa Knaupp. Thank you so much for your time this morning. And Danessa, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And if you're interested in following up, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also get me at Danessa@Avenue8Advisors.com. My email's at the back of the book. That's what I mean by authentic, and I'd be happy to help. This is why I'm here on this earth, is to help leaders navigate things like this.
Great. Danessa, thank you. Everybody have a great day.
Great. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.